Kate Jones, a 26-year-old nurse, was abruptly fired from the hospital where she had built her career after physically confronting her boss. Stunned by this unexpected turn of events, Kate confided in a homeless man who offered her some comfort. The next morning, as she looked out her window, she saw a limousine parked outside her modest home, completely unaware that her life was about to change forever. It was Monday morning when Kate awoke to the sound of her alarm clock ringing beside her bed. She quickly prepared a cup of coffee and scrambled some eggs, setting them on the table. She also made sure to put the food in its usual spot for her cat before grabbing the necessary medications and taking them to another room in the house. The small residence showed signs of wear: water stains on the ceiling, worn-out furniture, and a frayed carpet. It had been a long time since anything had been properly maintained or updated. Despite the difficult situation, John Jones, Kate's father, maintained a vibrant spirit. When Kate entered the room with his medications, he was already awake and in good spirits. He greeted her with a warm smile and a kiss on the forehead, taking the pills while observing her closely. Even though Kate had just woken up, she seemed troubled, a worry that he had noticed in her weeks ago. But each time he asked, she brushed it off, insisting that it was just the stress of her demanding job. Yet, Mr. Jones knew his daughter well enough to sense that something deeper was troubling her. "Daughter, your father may be old and sick, but I can still listen and help if you need me," he said gently. "It's nothing, Dad. I told you, everything is fine," Kate replied, handing him a box of pills. After making sure her father had taken his medication, Kate wished him a good day before heading out the door. As she boarded the bus to the hospital, she slipped a pill into her bag, a precaution she had started taking over a month ago to manage her anxiety. The stress of working at that hospital had turned her life into a living nightmare, but she couldn't afford to quit. She needed the job to pay the bills and, most importantly, to ensure her father received his medication on time. The bus suddenly jerked to a stop, snapping Kate out of her negative thoughts. She realized she had missed her stop and hurriedly got off at the next one, retracing her steps back to the hospital. Without the pill, she might have broken down right there on the sidewalk, overcome with frustration and helplessness. Inside the hospital, Kate was changing into her scrubs when she heard a man's voice in the next room. She instantly recognized it as that of Rick Donovan, the 42-year-old surgeon she worked with several times a week. Anxiety welled up inside her as she hastily finished getting ready. Taking a deep breath, she hoped the day would pass without incident, but as soon as she stepped out of the locker room, she found herself face to face with Donovan. "Miss Jones, it's been a while," the doctor said with a smirk. "Why haven't you visited me lately?" Kate tried to keep her composure, forcing herself not to show fear. "I was assigned to another department. They needed experienced nurses in the other wing." Donovan gave a brief smile and replied, "Ah, I see. You must be very experienced then." Kate attempted to leave, but the surgeon kept talking, demanding her attention. "I brought a little gift for you," he started. But before he could continue, Kate cut him off, saying she had to hurry to attend to her patients. She was already late because of the bus and didn't want to lose her job. "Lose your job? As long as it's up to me, that will never happen," Donovan assured her, though his words were a lie. Just a few hours later, Kate found herself walking through the hospital's reception for the last time, tears streaming down her face. She had been fired by the administrative director and now had no idea what to do. The knot of anxiety and fear in her chest grew tighter as she realized how badly things had spiraled out of control. Desperate for some comfort, Kate rushed to the one place nearby where she felt safe, a small cafe across the street from the hospital. She sat down on the terrace, and soon a server brought her a strong espresso. She wanted to gather her thoughts, but she was in shock, feeling guilty, lost, and utterly alone. Suddenly, a deep, kind voice interrupted her thoughts. "Excuse me, are you okay?" Startled, Kate looked up to see a homeless man watching her with concern. "Yes, I'm fine," she repeated, trying to convince herself as much as him. "Why are you crying? Are you sure you're okay?" he asked again. It was only then that Kate noticed a tear had escaped down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away, looking around to see if anyone else had noticed. "It's nothing. It'll pass," she said, her eyes catching the sight of the man's worn and dirty clothes. He had been the only one to show concern for her. As the man prepared to leave, Kate couldn't bring herself to let him go. Instead, she asked if he would like to sit down and have something to eat. Though she knew she would have to manage her money more carefully from now on, she felt that this small act of kindness would be worth it. The man accepted her offer and took a seat across from her. He introduced himself as Ian Bradley, while she only introduced herself as Kate. Ian, with his bright, friendly eyes, didn't waste any time. He looked at Kate and said, "You know, Kate, living on the streets, I've met many people going through tough times, and I can tell you're having a rough day. Forgive me if I'm intruding, but I want you to know that I'm just a good listener, someone you'll likely never see again. So if you need to vent, feel free to do so." Kate smiled faintly and thanked him. She admitted that he was right. She was having a terrible day. "I'm a nurse, well, I was a nurse at that hospital," she said, pointing to the building across the street. "But today, I got fired. I shouted at the chief surgeon in front of everyone," she confessed, feeling both guilty and ashamed. "If you shouted, you must have had a good reason," Ian observed gently. Kate was silent for a few moments, then took a deep breath and began to pour her heart out to Ian. The words flowed as if they had been bottled up inside her for a long time. The truth was, ever since Rick Donovan had been transferred to the hospital from another unit, her life had become a nightmare. In the first few weeks, Donovan acted as if he didn't even notice Kate's presence in the operating room or the hospital corridors. But one day, during a routine conversation, he touched her shoulder. After that, the touches became more frequent, as did the intense, uncomfortable stares while she worked. During one surgery, he pretended to teach her a procedure and grabbed her by the waist in front of the entire team, who seemed to ignore the inappropriate gesture. Despite being married, Donovan once hinted that they should become closer, suggesting that it could be beneficial for Kate's career at the hospital. She quickly changed the subject and discreetly withdrew. She had considered reporting the situation to the administration, but what could she say? His advances were repulsive, but they were subtle enough to be dismissed by someone on the outside. Moreover, Donovan had made it clear that he was a close friend of the hospital's director, meaning it would be her word against that of a powerful, married chief surgeon. She swallowed her discomfort in silence, knowing that losing her job was not an option. It would be irresponsible to interrupt her father's treatment or lose the roof over their heads. However, what happened just minutes before she ran to the cafe that day was the final straw. After a successful surgery in which Donovan had saved another man's life, they were both cleaning up. Donovan was boasting about his ability to save lives, even claiming that with all the knowledge science had acquired, he could defy even God's will. He was clearly exhilarated by his own skill and added, "There's only one thing that excites me more than saving someone's life, Kate. You." Kate was completely stunned, frozen by his words. That's when Donovan seized her moment of vulnerability, took her hand, and shoved it into the front pocket of his pants. "Feel this little gift I've got for you," he whispered. In a flash, Kate yanked her hand away and slapped him hard across the face. Donovan glared at her with fury, but restrained himself from lashing out. His fists clenched with rage, and his eyes burned with anger as he spat out, "You're ungrateful and crazy. You've just ruined your career over a harmless joke. I hope you know how to use a broom and wash dishes because you'll never step foot in a hospital in this city again. Now get out of my sight." That was when Kate ran out of the hospital, startling the receptionist, and ended up sitting in that cafe, feeling a strange mix of relief and anxiety after finally letting out what had been troubling her for weeks. However, she realized that Ian, the man sitting across from her, was probably going through far worse on the streets. "I'm sorry, I think I've talked too much," she said, suddenly feeling guilty. "There's no need to apologize," Ian replied with a kind smile. "I hope you feel better now that you've shared all of that." Kate thanked Ian for being such a good listener and ordered a sandwich for him, along with another cup of coffee for herself. They continued talking for a while, and Kate learned that Ian had once worked as a cleaner for a multinational company. But when the company went bankrupt, he never received his rightful compensation. With no money, he was evicted from his apartment and ended up living on the streets. He survived by doing odd jobs and relying on donations, but he could never secure a stable job because of his appearance and tattered clothes. Despite it all, he laughed, his eyes twinkling with a light that Kate hadn't seen in a long time. With a gentle smile, Ian looked at Kate and said, "If I were your boss at the hospital, I would rehire you in a heartbeat." His kind words warmed Kate's heart, and she felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. The conversation had been so pleasant and comforting that she hadn't even noticed the sky darkening. Realizing the time, Kate knew she needed to head home. Sensing this, Ian offered to walk her back to ensure she arrived safely. He suggested that he could walk a few paces behind her, just to keep an eye out for any trouble while avoiding drawing attention to the fact that they were together, given his disheveled and dirty appearance. But Kate shook her head and smiled, reassuring him that she didn't care if people saw them walking together. "I know you have a good heart and good intentions, Ian. That's all that matters to me," she said warmly. Ian was visibly moved by her words, nodding appreciatively, and they set off together toward the modest home Kate shared with her father. When they reached the doorstep, Kate thanked Ian for his company and mentioned that she had some food ready and would be happy to heat it up so he could have a proper meal for the night. Ian, touched by her generosity, politely declined, saying it wasn't necessary. Kate tried to insist, but Ian simply smiled, thanked her once more, and quietly walked away. Even in the dim evening light, his eyes still sparkled with kindness and gratitude. Kate entered her home and collapsed onto the living room sofa. It only took a few seconds for the dark thoughts to creep back in. What should she do? Should she report Rick Donovan to the police? Should she file a lawsuit? How could she possibly prove what had happened? Lost in her turmoil, she didn't notice her father, John Jones, emerging from his bedroom. He found her sitting there with the same pained expression she had worn earlier. Without asking any questions, he approached her and wrapped his arms around her, offering comfort. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together," he whispered. "You can always count on your father. I'll always be here for you." Kate clung to her father, allowing herself to cry softly. She wanted to tell him everything, but couldn't bring herself to do it just yet. Exhausted, she fell asleep on the couch, resting against her father's shoulder. Mr. Jones carefully rose, making sure not to wake her, and covered her with a blanket. He kissed her gently on the forehead before retreating to his room one last time. The next morning, Kate was jolted awake by the sound of her phone's alarm. She had slept on the couch and quickly silenced the alarm, not wanting to disturb her father. Determined to find a new job, she dressed quickly and went to prepare breakfast. But as she moved around the house, she noticed an unsettling stillness. The only sound was the soft meowing of her cat, who stood still, staring at the door to her father's room. Feeling a sense of dread, Kate gathered her father's medication as she did every morning and quietly opened his bedroom door. Mr. John Jones appeared to be peacefully sleeping, but something was different. The pallor of his skin, the stillness of his body. It took her a moment to comprehend what had happened. The pills she had been holding slipped from her hand and scattered across the floor. At her father's funeral, Kate was numb with disbelief. She had devoted so much time and energy to caring for him, and just the night before, he had seemed so well, reassuring her that he would always be there for her. Did he somehow know that the end was near? Why did this have to happen now, during such a difficult time in her life? Only a few people attended the funeral, but each of them seemed deeply moved. Those who knew John Jones admired him greatly for his playful and optimistic spirit. When the coffin was finally closed, it marked the most painful moment of Kate's life. After the burial, she walked alone toward the cemetery exit. She was unemployed and now, without her father, the weight of her grief felt unbearable. Just as she was about to call for a taxi, she noticed a luxury car parked across the street. A man stepped out and approached her, offering his condolences for her loss. He then handed Kate a card, saying that his client urgently wished to speak with her. Kate, still in the throes of grief, couldn't bring herself to ask what it was about. The man simply advised her that despite her pain, she shouldn't miss this opportunity. "Take care, Miss Kate," he said, before returning to his car. That week, Kate found it impossible to muster the energy to get out of bed. The apartment felt emptier than ever, and her motivation to find a new job had vanished. Grief came in waves, but in the quieter moments, she found herself thinking about the man who had given her the card. Feeling desperate and out of options, she decided to send a message to the number he had provided. 2 hours later, her doorbell rang. Kate was ready, though her appearance reflected the toll the past week had taken on her. Still, she steeled herself, trying to understand what this could mean. Perhaps it was a glimmer of hope at the end of a dark tunnel. Outside, the same luxury car from before was parked, waiting for her. "Good morning, Miss Kate. My boss would like to meet you. Will you join me?" the man said, motioning for her to get into the car. Kate had no idea who in the city could own such a car or why anyone would want to meet her. A simple unemployed nurse with a maxed-out credit card after her father's funeral. Yet, she followed the man into the car, and they drove off, eventually arriving at the parking lot of a grand, modern office building. Located in one of the most prestigious areas of the city, the hospital's headquarters was an imposing building, one Kate had never set foot in before. As the elevator ascended 15 floors, her heart pounded with a mix of nervousness and anticipation. When the doors opened, she was ushered into a spacious, elegantly furnished office, where she came face to face with a powerful woman who clearly commanded respect. This impeccably dressed woman had an air of authority about her, but there was a charisma that softened her serious expression. Beside her was a man who immediately began speaking to Kate. "Kate, I'm so glad you came. First and foremost, let me offer my deepest condolences," he said with genuine care before a warm smile spread across his face. It took a moment for Kate to recognize him. She was still trying to process everything, after all, but that wide smile and those familiar, bright eyes gave him away. It was Ian Bradley, the homeless man she had met on the street. But now, he was completely transformed. He was dressed in clean, well-fitting clothes, his beard was neatly trimmed, and his hair was carefully combed. Kate's mind raced. What could all this possibly mean? Ian, sensing her confusion, began to explain. He told her how worried he had been about her after their first meeting. He had returned to the cafe several times, hoping to see her again and make sure she was okay, but she never returned. Instead, he found himself surrounded by a very different crowd. Businessmen, all well-dressed, deep in conversation. Among them was a woman who seemed to be the center of attention, commanding the respect of everyone around her. Ian noticed that one of the men in the group was wearing a hospital ID badge. Out of concern, he approached the group to ask about Kate, but a security guard quickly intervened, preventing him from getting too close. It was then that the woman in the group, noticing the commotion, asked what the homeless man wanted. The men fell silent, and Ian realized that she must be the most important person among them. Summoning up his courage, he explained everything he knew about Kate and her harrowing experiences with the chief surgeon. The woman listened with rapt attention, her expression growing more serious by the minute. When Ian finished, she introduced herself as Megan Stewart. To his astonishment, she was the owner of the entire hospital chain. Megan immediately ordered her staff to drop everything and launch a full investigation into the matter. True to her word, her staff launched an internal inquiry, and it wasn't long before other nurses, waitresses, and receptionists began coming forward with their own stories. They told how the surgeon had made inappropriate jokes and made suggestive conversations with them. The deeper Megan dug into the matter, the more shocking the revelations became. She expanded her investigation to other hospitals within her network where the surgeon had worked, and the results were horrific. It turned out that Rick Donovan had been involved in a heinous incident involving a waitress at the hospital. He had drugged her by diluting medication in a glass of water. When the waitress revealed the date of the incident to Megan's team, they reviewed all the archived security footage from that day. The footage showed the exact moment Rick Donovan slipped a substance into the drink and handed it to the waitress. Moments later, she entered an empty ICU room to change the bed linens, and Donovan followed her inside. 15 minutes later, he was seen rushing out of the ICU, clearly agitated. The sight of this infuriated Megan Stewart, and the waitress concluded her account by revealing that the harassment had begun weeks earlier, with Donovan subtly touching her shoulder while she was at work. Armed with this mountain of evidence, a case was opened. During the trial, Kate Jones was not only reinstated at the hospital, but also promoted to head nurse. Her perseverance paid off, as Megan offered Ian a job at the hospital doing general maintenance work, rewarding him financially for his role in helping a woman like Kate. The sum was substantial, enough to allow him to start a new life with dignity. A few months later, the judge handed down his verdict. Rick Donovan was sentenced to 13 years in prison. With the sentence, Kate and the other victims were finally able to find some peace. After the trial, Kate visited her father's grave and invited Ian to come along. "I wish you could have known my father," she said softly as she laid flowers on the grave. "I'll tell you all about him." Hand in hand, they walked towards the exit of the cemetery. Every now and then, Kate and Ian were seen together, having coffee in the same cafe where they met, but now as a couple. If you like this story, please like and follow the channel. You may also find the next video on the screen just as exciting. Enjoy the session, and see you in the next video. The footage showed the exact moment Rick Donovan slipped a substance into the drink and handed it to the waitress. Moments later, she entered an empty ICU room to change the bed linen, and Donovan followed her inside. 15 minutes later, he was seen rushing out of the ICU, clearly agitated. The sight of this infuriated Megan Stewart, and the waitress concluded her account by revealing that the harassment had begun weeks earlier, with Donovan subtly touching her shoulder while she was working. Armed with this mountain of evidence, a case was opened. During the trial, Kate Jones was not only reinstated at the hospital, but was also promoted to head nurse. Her perseverance paid off, as Megan offered Ian a job at the hospital doing general maintenance work, rewarding him financially for his role in helping a woman like Kate. The sum was substantial, enough to allow him to start a new life with dignity. A few months later, the judge handed down his verdict. Rick Donovan was sentenced to 13 years in prison. With the sentencing, Kate and the other victims were finally able to find some peace. After the trial, Kate visited her father's grave and invited Ian to come with her. "I wish you could have known my father," she said softly as she placed flowers on the grave. "I'll tell you all about him." Hand in hand, they walked towards the cemetery exit. Every now and then, Kate and Ian were seen together, having coffee at the same cafe where they had met, but now as a couple. If you enjoyed this story, please like and follow the channel. You may also find the next video on the screen just as moving. Enjoy the session, and we'll see you in the next video. The footage showed the exact moment Rick Donovan slipped a substance into the drink and handed it to the waitress. Moments later, she entered an empty ICU room to change the bed linen, and Donovan followed her inside. 15 minutes later, he was seen rushing out of the ICU, clearly agitated. The sight of this infuriated Megan Stewart, and the waitress concluded her account by revealing that the harassment had begun weeks earlier, with Donovan subtly touching her shoulder while she was working. Armed with this mountain of evidence, a case was opened. During the trial, Kate Jones was not only reinstated at the hospital, but was also promoted to head nurse. Her perseverance paid off, as Megan offered Ian a job at the hospital doing general maintenance work, rewarding him financially for his role in helping a woman like Kate. The sum was substantial, enough to allow him to start a new life with dignity. A few months later, the judge handed down his verdict. Rick Donovan was sentenced to 13 years in prison. With the sentencing, Kate and the other victims were finally able to find some peace. After the trial, Kate visited her father's grave and invited Ian to come with her. "I wish you could have known my father," she said softly as she placed flowers on the grave. "I'll tell you all about him." Hand in hand, they walked towards the cemetery exit. Every now and then, Kate and Ian were seen together, having coffee at the same cafe where they had met, but now as a couple. If you enjoyed this story, please like and follow the channel. You may also find the next video on the screen just as moving. Enjoy the session, and we'll see you in the next video. Kate visited her father's grave and invited Ian to come along. "I wish you could have known my father," she said softly as she placed flowers on the grave. "I'll tell you all about him." Hand in hand, they walked towards the cemetery exit. Every now and then, Kate and Ian were seen together, having coffee at the same cafe where they met, but now as a couple. If you enjoyed this story, please like and follow the channel. You may also find the next video on the screen just as touching. Enjoy the session, and we'll see you in the next video. Kate visited her father's grave and invited Ian to come along. "I wish you could have known my father," she said softly as she placed flowers on the grave. "I'll tell you all about him." Hand in hand, they walked towards the cemetery exit. Every now and then, Kate and Ian were seen together, having coffee at the same cafe where they met, but now as a couple. If you enjoyed this story, please like and follow the channel. You may also find the next video on the screen just as touching. Enjoy the session, and we'll see you in the next video.